One and all, welcome to the third Your Affordable Sales Team sharing of golden nuggets of information. The Your Affordable Sales Team is a collaboration between Claire Lee, Venue Queen and Borrow My Garden, Kevin Holland and Martin Dempster of Trident Hospitality, and myself, Julian T from Compass Hotels Management. If I just share my screen quickly, then that will just make a little introduction on that point. Whoops, excuse me. Cool. Okay, so for Your Affordable Sales Team, YAST, we offer a suite of solutions for independent venues, hotels and hospitality establishments, providing proactive support in sales, in representation, in business strategy, operational support across all facets of business to add value to the on-site team. And this week, we are covering highly relevant topics, those of stress and wellness and hybrid events. And we are delighted to welcome this week Laura Capel-Abra and Avi Viedry. So for those of you that have attended our events before, you'll know the format. For those who haven't, we offer each of our two speakers 15 minutes with a 10-minute Q&A session immediately thereafter. We record each of the sessions, and as Claire mentioned, we are recording now, and then we post them onto our YouTube channel, so you can circle back on any information and any answers to any questions that you may need. So in respect of questions, if you could please send your questions through to admin through the chat function, and then Claire will pick those up and we can pose those to each of the presenters at the end of their specific presentation. So without further ado, let me introduce our speakers. So first, Laura Capel-Abra. Sorry, Laura, I will get your name correct. Laura being the founder of Stress Matters, No More Ifs or Buts, and the BEDO, the BEDO Academy. Passionate believer that success doesn't have to be stressful, and that improving our well-being improves the profitability of our businesses. She has 20 years experience working in the events and hospitality tourism sector, and for the last 5 years has been focusing on supporting well-being and development of teams across the sector. Avi, I'll come to you if I may, along with Rachel, just as an introduction as we reach your section. So if I stop sharing and pass over to Laura, and Laura, ask you to take it forward from here. Thank you.
Wonderful. So thank you very much for having me today. As I was so wonderfully introduced there, thank you. I am the founder of Stress Matters, and that's where my kind of hat is for you today. So I do work as a coach, and I work on group coaching programs for people in our industry as well. But today I'm here with my Stress Matters hat on, and the reason is, I imagine probably quite obvious, that mental health and well-being has been kind of thrown to the forefront recently. So from my side, obviously, I've been hugely concerned and focused on it for the last few years, but with everything that's happened over the last kind of 10, 11 months, actually, I think we're all feeling the kind of the personal impact, and the situation has really hit home for us as individuals, but also, of course, our teams as well. So as you said, I'm a big believer that success doesn't have to be stressful. And the reason I think that is because actually I've gone through periods of what I would refer to as burnout myself. I've had team members go off on sick leave with stress, but actually I know that you can turn a company around and you can change your mindset so that you're not prone to it. So where actually quite often we think in our industry, because it's so customer focused, that actually we're at their mercy, and actually the stress is inevitable because of course the pressure we're under with deadlines. But I don't believe it has to be that way. So we work with different businesses and across the kind of industry with associations to try and help educate people about how we can do things in a slightly better way. So I wanted to share some stats with you first of all, but I'm conscious of the fact that I don't know you guys. So whilst we're using chat for questions, I would also like to get you guys to use chat for what I think is probably one of the most important questions of the day. which is asking you, how are you doing at the moment? So I would love to say, let's all get ourselves off mute and have that chat, but unfortunately I am conscious of time. So I'm going to ask you to put it in the chat box. I'd like to know how you are doing today. Now, for me, as I said, it's one of the most important questions that we can ask every single day. Not only is it a question we should be asking ourselves, but of course asking our team members as well. So I'm sure we probably all ask everybody, oh, how are you doing? And inevitably, most often the answer is, yeah, fine. Yeah, I'm all right. And then we leave it at that. But actually, it's one of the most powerful questions we can ask. And if we give people the space to answer properly and honestly, and sometimes if we actually encourage that conversation by being honest ourselves, we have a far deeper connection with people. But it also means that we can really find out how people actually are doing. So I'd love to hear how you guys are in the chat, and take that question away and ask yourself, if you don't want to ask yourself right now, how are you doing today? Not how are you doing generally, how are you doing today in this moment? Are you having a good day? Actually, are you quite tired? Is it a frustrating day? What are you feeling today? So as I said, I was going to share some stats with you. So I don't know how much you track the data in your teams and how much you're kind of really aware of this yourself, but it's been found that over 50% of the days that individuals are off on sick leave from work is actually down to stress, anxiety, or depression. Now, it's some of the stats that show it up to 57%. So we've gone with 54, which is where I get that from a couple of sources, but yeah, has been reported as high as 57%. Now, it's one of those things to ask you, do you actually track this? Do you find out whether or not your team members are off with stress, anxiety, and depression, or is it more of physical illness? Now, the likelihood is they probably don't tell you, and they probably don't even know themselves. Quite often, if someone says, I'm sick, actually, it might be a stomach ache, it might be a headache, for example. And as we know from this stat, actually, it's quite likely that's going to be down to stress, anxiety, or depression, even if that individual doesn't know it themselves. And stress, anxiety, depression, mental health, well-being, this whole big area is really important for us as businesses, even at this time where obviously money is not coming in very freely. Actually, it's a really important time because even in a non-pandemic year, it costs on average just over £2,000 per employee, regardless if they have a mental ill health condition. Actually, just on average across all of your employees, anything ranging between £1,700 and £3,500, depending on the sector and the level, so the kind of the job role that they work in, per year in ill mental health. So it's a huge chunk of our budget that isn't in a budget line. So it's really important for us to be aware of what we can do for our teams to be able to actually improve the profitability of our businesses. Now, as I said, quite often that will be down to absence. So if you think about, especially in the last year, I imagine there's probably quite a few of us that have gone, oh, I can't be bothered today, really don't feel like it. And some of us have pushed on. And some of us have tried to do something, but probably haven't had the most productive days. And that's what we call presenteeism. So actually, when you essentially turn up for work, whether or not it's in a venue or if it's, working from your laptop at home, but actually aren't contributing hugely to the day, because quite frankly, you should probably be off sick that day. And the cost of presenteeism is far greater than when actually people don't turn up for work that day because they are sick. And of course, when we think about the costs of mental ill health as well, actually staff turnover comes in there. So when we've got high staff turnover because our team members are really struggling, that cost gets attributed. So we're looking here at a team of about 100 people and the kind of costs that you would imagine seeing. But of course, you won't see them, as I said, on a budget line for your venue. Actually, these are going to be costs that are spread out across other parts of your budget. But I wanted to make it clear that actually it is costing us money, our poor mental health and well-being. Now, I mentioned well-being, and of course, when we talk about mental health, some of us have quite a lot of stigma around the words mental health. I'm not going to ask you to share your kind of opinions on those words right now, but for a lot of people, you wouldn't be alone if you hear the words mental health and think negative. And actually, one of the things that we always try to remind people is mental health is it's a term. We all have mental health. We all have physical health. We all have mental health. Sometimes we have ill mental health, exactly like we might be physically ill. It's exactly the same, but we all have mental health. But there's a little bit of stigma still around that phrase, which is understandable because of all the experiences we've had potentially with media in the past. Now, when we talk about well-being, actually well-being includes physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. So quite often you'll hear the terms mental well-being mental health, well-being, you're probably asking yourself, what does that all mean? Well, actually, well-being kind of encompasses everything. So if you think about the fact that actually you might have had a sports injury or hurt yourself, maybe your back hurts, for example, the likelihood is it probably makes you feel a bit rubbish, and actually it can start to impact on our mental health as well. So a few years ago, I had a skiing accident, and so my knee needed an operation, but actually the impact of that meant that actually I felt really isolated because I couldn't go anywhere. I wasn't independent anymore because actually I needed somebody to bring me things throughout the day. And it started to wear down on the rest of my health as well as just my physical health. So when we think about ourselves and our team, it's important to remember that all of these areas are completely connected, which is why you'll have seen that BBC talk about that kind of loneliness factor of people that have been shielding or people that live on their own, and you may well have experienced this yourselves. Actually, that's because it comes part of our spiritual and emotional well-being. If we don't feel connected to other people, it can impact all areas of our well-being. So there are kind of 4 things that I wanted to kind of give you today as things to think about. So we at Stress Matters run a pledge scheme for the events, hospitality and tourism industry. And the kind of the essence behind that is to say to you, right, let's have a benchmark of where you guys are at the moment. Right, so do you know how your team are doing at the moment and how they're really doing at the moment? So whether or not you carry out some kind of employee checks, whether or not you ask that simple question of how are you doing, understanding how teams are at the moment are really important. And of course, being able to benchmark any impact you try and have and how successful that impact is as well. One of the things we find a lot, and particularly at the moment because of the situation we're in, is people are trying to be very reactive to people's mental health and well-being, which is good because it means we're paying attention and we're taking notice. But unfortunately, actually, all things like this, being proactive is far more impactful long-term. So actually thinking about what your well-being plan is across the year. It's no good just saying, right, we're going to do a 1-hour stress workshop and hope that solves all of our problems for the mental health and well-being of our teams. Actually, we want to be thinking about what can we do throughout the year to really support ourselves and our team members' well-being. There's something which you might have heard of called mental health first aiders. They're really useful to have across your team, whether or not it's in the venue and helping actual customers as well as your staff. So mental health first aiders, exactly like it sounds like, people that are trained to understand the signs and symptoms of poor mental health, but most importantly, how to help those individuals as well. We run a scheme that's free to kind of just to join, which is called MHFA Every Event. So we're trying to support the industry and say, actually, we want venues and organisers to be making sure that everybody feels comfortable, whether or not you're an overnight visitor, whether or not you're a delegate, whether or not you're a staff member, that actually there's somebody looking out for you in every place you go for your mental health, not just your physical health. And think about the support that you provide for your team as well. So thinking about, actually, do you look out for their well-being? Of course, we know about breaks, we know about the kind of the mandatory requirements in terms of legislation for health and safety, but actually, what are you doing to really understand that at the moment, in the situation we are, how the team are doing and the kind of different types of support they might need? So the kind of things to think about and to kind of from our experience to share with you, when the wellbeing plans have been successful, it's when they're actually all inclusive. So everybody's been involved in that process. So think about whatever you do, actually, can you make sure not necessarily sitting in the same room at the same time, because obviously that's not practical, but thinking about that everybody is involved in a way that makes sense for them, but still giving people the opportunity to look at what they need from you as a team member, as a manager, to support them. So actually thinking about, actually, well, somebody might be all over their own physical well-being in their personal life. They might be fit as a fiddle physically, but somebody else might actually need a little bit more support of that in the workplace. And the same with that isolation. Some people might have a really good support network around them, and other people might feel like actually their only support network is their colleagues. So how can we support people in different ways? And lead from the top. Actually, it's really hard to create culture change around mental health and wellbeing if it's not being brought into from the top of the organisation. Think about that. So the kind of challenges is what are when things are put into place but not communicated well. A bit like anything, you know, if you try and put a plan in place, people need to know about it and need to understand why you've chosen to do something. Thinking about, as I said, making sure that it's not a one-off thing. If we do something like support Mental Health Awareness Day or support International Stress Awareness Week, that's great, and it's a great signpost in the sand. But also what it kind of implies is that we only care about somebody's mental health and well-being 1 week or 1 day a year. So think about what you can do to support people throughout the year, and think about how you prioritise your budgets. So I'm fully aware, of course, that budgets are extremely tight and non-existent at the moment, but also it's the time when people need their mental health and wellbeing supported more than ever. So think about actually how you prioritise your budgets. So there are 5 areas that we recommend thinking about, and this works really well on a personal level, but also kind of to talk about with your teams as well. So we call it the thrive, not survive approach. And essentially there's 5 areas. So you've got energy, movement, connection, rhythm, and kindness. So we can generally look at ourselves, and of course, as I said, with your team members as well. And this does actually work for thinking about our customers and our delegates to events as well. Thinking about how do we take into account these 5 areas in everybody's experience of a day. So actually think about, do you work to your energy levels? Do you encourage people to manage their own time and diaries, of course, shifts allowing? Do we allow people to move, but not so much that they're exhausted? So finding that balance around movement. Connection being really important, particularly in the world that we are in terms of actually people want connection with other people. But of course, internally at the moment with the way we're working, if we're working from home rather than in a venue, actually, are we over connected with people? How do we think we can take into account that consideration? Thinking about the rhythm, the fact that we don't know what's going on and we have to kind of just roll with it a little bit. And for some people, that's really anxiety driving. And for other people, actually, they quite like the thrill of it. And kindness as well, a really important one. So being kind to yourself, but of course, being kind to other people. So thinking about trying to take yourself out of your moment of panic, your moment of worry, and think, what can I do to show kindness to somebody else? So there's been so many lovely things that people have done over the last kind of 9 months or so to show kindness, because actually there's scientific evidence to prove that if we are kind to other people, it makes us feel good. So even if we want a selfish way of thinking about it, being kind to others really does help ourselves as well. And just to finish off for you, we have some free checklists on the website that might be of interest to you. So thinking about workplace wellbeing, but also mental safety at events, and that can of course go into venues and actually attendees at an event as well. So feel free to have a look at those. We've got lots of kind of support and advice, lots of free kind of resources essentially available on the website. And if you want to have any questions, and hopefully you've been putting them in the chat to Claire anyway, but I am here to answer any questions in terms of mental health and wellbeing.
Thank you, Laura. We do have a couple of questions for you.
Wonderful.
So, do you anticipate there'll be a rush of mental health issues for employers to face when the industry reopens and people return to work, or will people just slot back into place?
Good question. I don't think it's going to be a rush as such, because I think a lot of them are probably already happening. I think it's actually how aware we are going to be of them. But yes, we know there's data to prove that mental health illness is on the increase. So we did, Mind did a study last year, and that was obviously only really, who knows, say halfway through the pandemic, that actually depression had increased in adults in the UK. So we know mental health illness has increased because of the pandemic. So I think that there is definitely going to be an impact on workplaces as we kind of come back into action. But I think the likelihood is actually some of those individuals are already struggling and already suffering with that mental health illness. They might not know about it yet. They might not know it's an illness. And you might not know if you've not asked, but I don't think it's necessarily they're going to suddenly restart. As soon as the industry restarts, that's when people are going to become unwell. I think that's probably already there anyway.
Okay, thank you. And how should employers manage mental health issues, as they must respect the privacy of individuals, but others in the business may need to know about a person's mental health situation?
Okay, so first challenge would be, why do we need to know about somebody's mental health illness? Do we need to necessarily know about people's physical health and illness? So I think quite often when we think about mental health, it's really useful to sometimes switch out the word depression or anxiety or mental health, for example, with backache or broken arm, for example, and think, actually, do we need to know, or do we think we need to know because it's something that sounds so unknown? So first of all, I challenge that and say, why do we need to know? But in terms of kind of confidentiality, what I would say is that this is why we kind of try and talk about things like culture change, because if the culture in your team and your organization is actually, you know, we support our team members, whatever the situation is, we are leading from the top, we are being open and honest about people's mental health and well-being, and we're saying that, you know, it's okay not to be okay every single day, then actually there's no reason why people need to feel like they need to hide something. Actually, you can create a culture where people are a bit more open, exactly as you probably say, I've got a cold, or, you know, I'm feeling a bit fluey today, or whatever it is. What we want is people to be able to say that about their mental health as well. Now, of course, there's so much stigma still kind of around it at the moment, but that's one of the things that we kind of urge you to do, is to think about how can you remove some of that stigma so that actually people can talk about it honestly. Because if you don't talk about it honestly, that's when it becomes a hidden topic of conversation and it becomes more challenging for people to deal with. So I'd say try and create the culture change, which I appreciate is of course not easy and takes its time, but by asking some really just open questions like, how are you doing, and, you know, what can we do to help, rather than making assumptions, actually we can really have quite a positive impact on people's recovery.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Do we have, I don't have any other questions. Does anybody have any other questions? Julian.
Can I lob one in? When you can open up an absolute can of worms when you say, how are you? so I'm just wondering the extent or the degree of training, Laura, that somebody needs in order to ask that question and be ready to answer it, or to deal with it in an informed way. And you know, training is training, but I'm not sure whether it's, you know, is this a 2-year course or a 2-week course? What does that look like in terms of time commitment to be qualified, certified?
That's a really good question. Thank you, Julian. So essentially what I would say is it's a question any of us can answer regardless of training. But it probably does come down to how strong an empathy level we have. So actually, if you kind of say to yourself, I'm actually probably not particularly empathetic and I'm not a great listener, then of course you're probably not going to be best placed to have a really honest conversation with somebody. So actually, if you're the kind of person that's naturally quite empathetic and feel like you're quite a good listener, and you can tend to tell that by who shares with you. Do people actually open up to you in your personal life, for example? That's when we can tend to tell whether or not we are a good listener, because we aren't, unfortunately, all good listeners. So if you are, then great. Actually, it's only a simple question. We don't need to have official training. However, of course, if you don't feel that confident, there are things you can do. So we would suggest listening training. And what we run a workshop called Building Connection and Empathy. So it's trying to actually understand what it means to be empathetic rather than sympathetic, and the difference. But also the mental health first aiding qualification. So we're accredited by Mental Health First Aid England to run the MHFA courses. So becoming a mental health first aider essentially gives you those improved listening skills, but it also gives you the kind of what we call the process, the action plan of how to help somebody. So if you proactively reach out to somebody because you're a bit worried about them, and we talk about the kind of things to look out for, and actually they say, do you know what, I'm not okay, or maybe they've come to you in what would be a great situation, they've come to you and said, I'm not okay, I don't know what to do. What we do in the mental health first aid course is we basically talk you through the action plan of what you need to follow, and essentially what we refer to is as signposting. So we're not training anyone to be a therapist, that's not the job. Actually what we're doing is we're saying to you, no, this is how you can support somebody in the moment. So exactly like with physical first aid, in physical first aid, you don't get taught how to be a doctor or a surgeon. You get taught to how to help a person in that moment and how to get them to a hospital, for example, if that's what's needed. And it's essentially the same for mental health first aid. So we're teaching you how to have those initial conversations, how to help people in the moment, and then whereabouts to kind of direct them to. And the mental health first aid course that we run is essentially 4 mornings. So it's a very short period of time in terms of actually you're talking about a couple of hours each morning in terms of what we call self-study, so doing an online portal type learning, and then it's 2.5 hours of a group live session as well. So at the end of the 4 days, you basically become a Mental Health First Aid England, Mental Health First Aider, accredited by Mental Health First Aid England. You have your certificate, workbook, manual, all of those wonderful things. And you have, hopefully, at that point, the confidence to be able to have those conversations. So it's one of those things that, yeah, there is a course you can do. There's a couple of different things you can do, but that very basic nature of asking someone how they're doing, hopefully, if we feel like we're prepared to answer that, you know, have that open conversation, we don't need training to ask that one question.
Brilliant. Thank you, Laura. That's really kind.
No worries.
Claire, any more questions for Laura? Anyone?
No more questions have come through, unless
Okay.
anybody wants to ask any.
Doesn't look that way.
Oh, Laura, you got it quite lightly today.
I got it quite like. Well, I'll do a now you just mentioned MHFA, I'll do a final plug. So we run a monthly public mental health first aid course. We do in-house courses as well if you want to train more than 10 people. If you want to just train yourself or a couple of people, currently it's 199 plus VAT for the 4 half days. I think it goes back up to 225 in April, but for the March course, it's about 200 quid. So it's a pretty reasonable cost to kind of get those skills. If people are interested in the course, let me know and we can get you booked on.
Brilliant, thank you.
Laura, just to help in that, as we share the information that goes out, I don't know if you wanted to put anything just in the chat as a link for that, because of course this ends up on the YouTube channel. I can't see, I don't know whether the chat goes up on there, I can't recall, but for everybody it's here, at least if they needed to, they can at least see that link and could copy that down if they wanted. Laura, thank you very much indeed. That's absolutely fascinating. I love the bit about being a good listener, as I'm not one. But certainly I think from that perspective of just opening up and listening in the first instance, often that is a huge icebreaker. So if nothing else learned from today, just that simple point alone is one to hit home with. Okay, well look, we're absolutely bang on time. So well done, Laura, thank you. Let's move on. Let's move on to second presentation. So if I may, I'd like to introduce the virtual event company. So we've Avi Vidri and Rachel Waldron from the virtual event company. So virtual event company is a virtual and hybrid event specialist. It provides consultancy and project management for venues and for agencies. And interestingly, the company evolved out of live event management. So that's really useful in terms of the fact that it knows the industry and the challenges of the industry very well. Avi's going to present for us and then questions can be posed. I think Rachel was going to take questions in the first instance, but again, if we do those through the chat function into admin. Avi is Chief Technologist, if I'm correct there, Avi, I hope so, at Virtual Event Company, so looks after the technology side of the business and very kindly and sympathetically for us today has promised to make this presentation not overly technical or not technical. We will be the judges, but I'm sure it will help us tremendously, Avi. So if I may, over to you and thank you very much.
Great, thanks very much, Julian. So no pressure there then. So let's just make sure you can see my screen. Yeah. Okay, so my name's Avi. So the Virtual Event Company literally does what it says on the tin. We don't have our own technology platform. So what we do is that we try and find the best solution or the best answer for our clients and their needs. I thought before going into hybrid, I'd have a very quick few words on what a virtual event is. Now, we all know meetings, we've all had Zoom fatigue and Teams fatigue. We've had that extensively over the last year. We know what webinars are. So webinars are one person to many people viewing. A virtual event is a combination of both, and it's something which we call an experience. Okay. So the best way of having a look at one is just to have a look at an example of a virtual event that we carried out recently. It was back in November. And what you see here are two screen grabs on, oops, something can only happen when you're live. So let's just go back. Okay, there you go. So you have a home page for the event, and just to see some of the menu items on the left-hand side for a virtual event, you can have videos, speakers, exhibition sponsors, similar to any any event really. And the image on the right-hand side, you've got the actual presentation. We've got a panel session of 4 people presenting, probably from the home or the office, with some engagement on the right-hand side, some Q&A. So this is all about sharing content at events. The other big area of events we know is networking. So this is the ability for this event, 2,000 attendees could search for each other and chat with each other, as well as hold video chats. Another key area of events generally and how they can be implemented in a virtual event is to have exhibitors and sponsors. This particular event had 90 different exhibitors where we could have their company information, videos, images, etc., all available for attendees to download, as well as communicate directly with the company. So let's go on to hybrid events. Now, I'm obviously not going to spend any time explaining what a live event is. So the question here is, how can the gentleman on the right of this image participate in the live event which is taking place with the rest of the audience? So just looking at it from a venue perspective, old cliche, I'm sure you've heard that plenty of times, the new normal. So for venues is hybrid, or for generally hybrid events, are they the new normal? From the venue's perspective, things that you need to think about are space and respecting government guidelines on social distancing. Audiovisual, so each venue or group or chain will have their own existing setup, but then they can also use production companies. And bandwidth. Bandwidth is important, but it's not a showstopper. So I know many venues are worried about their bandwidth of internet, but it is quite easy to buy boosters for a particular event. So that shouldn't be a showstopper or a large concern. So the key parties involved on delivering on a hybrid event are firstly the venue. Obviously, we need the space. Next is a production partner or an AV company. In many cases, venues may already have a partner. The third one is an optional, and that is obviously where someone like the virtual event company would come in, and that is a virtual or hybrid event specialist. The key thing for us is exactly what Julian said at the beginning. Our background is in event management and live event management. So what we would provide the end-to-end event and project management to suit both the live attendees as well as the remote attendees. So we need to recognize that we've got 2 different audiences, they're going to have 2 different experiences, and how do we make them both get the best out of the events. So what are the benefits for venues? Well, firstly, it's a new offering, and just remember that your clients, who might be agencies, corporates, or local businesses, they're also not experts on hybrid. So I understand you probably aren't on the hybrid or the virtual side, but nor are your clients. So there's a chance for you to offer them something different, something unique. You can offer them a greater reach because of a remote audience. Hybrid events are greener, and you can provide richer analytics for your clients, for both remote as well as live attendees. So in terms of the operations then, hybrid event is normally carried out via an app. I'm sure you and I get lots of emails in our inboxes about virtual hybrid platforms. They all look very similar to what I've got on the screen. The key thing is where does the content come from? So we've got the fireside chat taking place in this image. Of course, what we want is the content in there to come from within a venue. So that is the key thing. So that could be a live speaker, a panel session, a breakout rooms, etc. So all coming from the venue. Now, just look at some examples of, and these next few slides are graphical, so less of the bullet points, just to give ideas. This is an event we carried out in, I think, September. It was carried out in a studio, but it could just as easily have been carried out in a meeting room, in a venue, with 30 people watching, 30 people socially distanced. So that's an example of a meeting which could take place on of a hybrid event. I have talked a lot about venues, but much of what I've said can apply to meetings as well, and I will come back to that. Here's another example of a panel session. So people addressing an audience, maybe of 10, 20, 30 people. And we also have the screen behind. So on the screen, you might have remote speakers, or there may be remote attendees as well. So there are many different options. And one thing you can think about is just conceptualizing. The panelists could turn around, face the screen, and form a virtual roundtable. So just giving ideas of implementation and how to manage or operate hybrid events. Here's a couple of examples. I don't really need to say very much, just images and ideas for you to think about within your own environments. This could be on the left, could be a breakout session, and on the right, just to stress, though, you've got so you might have two remote speakers with one person on stage, and in the background you've got some live polling. So it's very important that any solution you have respects both, encourages engagement. So it's engagement both of live attendees as well as those remote. Yeah. And things like question and answers, polling, chat, all of those are normally undertaken within the app. And one of the key things about the app is that it should be the same app for the people who are attending remotely as well as those on site. And that way they'll all be able to communicate together using the same platform and the same technology. Here's another example. This is an event by L'Oreal. And in this example, the event was going out live again. It could have been done in a meeting room or a small room in any venue. But this was going out live through LinkedIn and Twitter, and people were reacting to it. You guys, the venues, you don't need to worry or think too much about the technology platform, because that's what your tech platform provider or your hybrid event provider will do for you. So they'll manage all of that for you. So just coming on to the last few slides then, I think one thing which has probably come out in the slides and the images is just the sheer variety of options, or the large number of options. We call it one event with two experiences. So one experience for the live attendees and a different experience for the remote attendees. So the content can be a combination of pre-recorded and live content. You can have various breakouts, plenaries, and you just need to think about, for each event or meeting, what does that look like? What does the plenary, what does the breakout room look like? Will it be remote people? Will it be people live, or a combination of both? One key thing is throughout, think about how to have engagement, as I mentioned before, the Q&A and polling. You might find that Networking Lounge works for people, live attendees, but not so well for remote. And also just thinking about remote or virtual attendees, their agenda may be different. Certainly you want their experience to be similar, When it comes to the very beginning, the whole registration process, you want to really have the one registration process where people can choose, yes, I want to attend live, or no, I want to attend remotely. But when it comes to the actual agenda, you just need to think that attention span for people remote is different to those actually in the room. Here's a great story which just came out in the event press a couple of days ago, and I just thought it was just sharing, just highlighting the areas in bolded. So convention bureaus from a number of cities in the north of England have got together to allow delegates to attend the same national event at different COVID secure venues, and they're all connected through live streaming technology. So each hub is linked together by using technology. So if you think about half a dozen different venues have used the technology they already have, probably did a bit of work to get together, a bit of networking, and come up with a fairly very clever, unique solution, I think, which allows hybrid events to take place, one single event with multiple hubs or hubs around the country, and I thought that was really clever. So just to give ideas to some of the venues here who may or may not have the technology already there, but to how they can work together with other independent hotels if they are independent, to maybe provide some sort of a joint offering. Okay. Okay, let's do this. Okay, so let's look at the commercial aspects, and I'll just have a look at costings as well, because obviously these are going to be important. So venues can, so events, let's look at events first. Events can be complex. So normally they require a fairly detailed brief, which is exactly the same as you have at a normal live event. For meetings, we can create possibly fixed packages and call it like a virtual delegate rate, similar to a DDR, day delegate rate. So each venue is different. What exactly this VDR looks like is going to depend for change from venue to venue. But we can think in terms of maybe try and come up with a standard package for those who will be attending live, those who will be remote. An important factor is economies of scale. So probably it's very likely that the cost of the technology is going to be the same, whether there's 10 or 100 or 1,000 people attending remotely. So the more the better, yeah, to reduce the overall cost. So that's a consideration. And other venue commercial options are sponsoring and networking opportunities or exhibitor opportunities, because now you can give your sponsors and exhibitors a global or a wider reach through the virtual or the hybrid solution. Costs of considerations. You need to think in terms of a platform, and this is why, you know, your hybrid or virtual partner will advise on the most appropriate platforms. So the technology platform through which the virtual events will be published, and from there onwards onto either a website or YouTube or various others. So there are various options. So licensing and configuration of a platform would be a consideration of cost. Production, most venues are already familiar with production companies or have relationships with them already, so have a good idea of production costs. Of course, it's going to depend on case by case, whether it's a meeting, whether it's an event. You need to bring in more equipment, or you can use the equipment you already have. Other options is that enhanced experiences. So you can, for example, offer a solution whereby for remote attendees, you can deliver food and beverage to them at lunchtime. So again, thinking a bit creatively, and of course the resourcing required to run the events and manage the events. So I've covered a lot in a very short period of time. I'm conscious of having covered a lot. Open to questions, and obviously all this content will be available to you afterwards. Myself or Rachel, we're happy to address any questions you have, or even go and look at some of the slides again that I went very quickly through.
Thank you, RV. That was really useful, but as you say, a lot of information there. Okay, so we've got a few questions for you. When should virtual events replace Zoom calls?
Yesterday. Zoom fatigue set in, I think, not yesterday. It set in lockdown was in March, so I think April the 1st is when Zoom fatigue set in. And because of that, many organizations have been looking to do something beyond Zoom. Again, one of the slides showed you what Zoom was, what a webinar was, and then just to give you an idea of what a virtual event is. Obviously, Zoom is so cheap, that you know, depending on your budget. But as you get budget, you want to do a bit more than Zoom and Teams. Then the tool, there are tools out there now which are relatively cheap, so and affordable to go to the next level of Zoom, and then the next level is a virtual event, and etc. So there are tools out there to go beyond Zoom. Definitely, we're happy to advise on that.
Brilliant, thank you. So listening to your presentation, hybrid events could be seen by a venue as being quite simple to arrange, but the tech side being managed by others. Hoteliers can therefore concentrate on what they do best by providing a venue, the food and beverage. Is that right? Are we looking at this the right way, or have we picked up the wrong end of the stick?
How would you answer that, Claire? I think that is how we see this. So venue. So I had a slide with the three main stakeholders. The venue does what the venue does best. Obviously, provide the venue as well as the F&B, etc. Production company does what the production company does best. And then if there's a need for a middle layer, the company that brings it all together, manages, thinks through the solution. I mean, if you in a normal environment, in sort of like a live environment, you'd have an event management company doing that. Yeah. So when it comes to the hybrid event, that event management company also needs to manage the technology, the hybrid asset, and that's basically what a company like the virtual events company would do. So we partner with the venue, and if they have an existing AV partner, then work with those as well. Or if the venue doesn't have an AV partner, then we can obviously recommend as well, and work in partnership to deliver on a client brief. Okay,
right, Rachel. If we're working as a venue, does the venue need a checklist so that they can go through what the client requirements are in order that when they're in a position to pass it over to the virtual event company, they can do so having covered all the questions that almost you need answering without you having to constantly keep going back? So should there be a sort of standard checklist?
Yeah, we've got a standard checklist which we go through when we talk to the clients or agents for each occasion. And what the venue really needs to understand is it's not difficult to be a venue for a hybrid event. You have to approach it in the same way that you would a live event. You need to know the ins and outs of what your client's trying to achieve while they're on site. So it's all about the numbers, obviously the F&B, which is taken into consideration, and that's what the venue would look at. It's about how many breakouts you need, whether there's going to be a main plenary, how many speakers are going to be there. Obviously, you now need to ask whether how many speakers are going to be on site, how many are going to be remote. So it's looking at every single detail of a live event and then thinking, which bit's going to be on site, where are the delegates going to be, where are the speakers going to be, who's going to be in the breakouts, So that's the more technical side, which is what we would then take on board. But we can certainly provide a checklist, say of 10 points that you would need to go through on the conversations you have, so that you can be proactive about selling these events on in your venue.
Okay, so venues could almost contact you directly, could they, just to, because for a lot of people it's a little bit, this is the scary bit on how do they do this and how do they ask that, and actually they need to be confident almost before the phone's ringing.
Yes, and every venue is different, and that's what you've got to remember. So whatever I'm saying here, I can have a separate conversation with whoever wants to have that prior to you going out and speaking to your clients, just so we can run through what you need to know for your specific venue.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so you're happy that everyone contacts you?
Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you. Okay, one more question then. Have other industries already adopted this technology, such as universities broadcasting across multiple venues to multiple audiences with one keynote speaker?
I would say yes. Yes. So that example, many chains have Zoom rooms. I don't know if you've heard of the technology Zoom rooms or WebEx rooms. So within a chain of hotels, they can offer that virtual or hybrid solution that I showed that the multiple regions, sorry, the cities in the north are providing. They're using convention bureaus, but there are many hotel chains that have that technology already in place because they've got, because they're connected. In terms of other industries, yes, education, and everyone is looking to do something different, and they're not waiting for normal to come back. And if there's one takeaway from this whole session, it is don't wait for normal, because there is no.
What is normal now?
Exactly, what is normal? So if normal is thinking creatively, and what can you offer that you haven't been before or been able to, because you don't have the knowledge. Talk to people who know, talk to your peers as well. Yeah, and just see if you can work with other hotels. What can you offer together, and come up with other concepts.
Brilliant, thank you. I think that's all of the questions.
Great stuff. Great stuff. I think it's an absolutely fascinating topic. I really, really do. I think there's a huge misconception over a venue having to do everything and therefore know everything, and that clearly isn't the case. And the more one learns, the more one realizes actually, kind of stick to your knitting, keep to your specialism, and partner with others to help you through. So yeah, more to see on that one, I'm sure. Okay, look. A huge thank you, I think, therefore, to Laura, to Avi, and to Rachel for today. Massive amount of content in those presentations. Really very grateful to all of you for that. Claire, if I just share my screen quickly, just to give a little bit of heads up on the next session that's coming up. He says, trying to be technical. There we go. Does that work? Sort of works. No. Yes. Hurrah. Okay. So, next session is on the 25th of February, and I think we're back to 11 o'clock, if I'm correct for that.
10 o'clock.
And we have a slightly different setup at this particular one. So this particular session for the 25th of February is dedicated to one set of presentations, and that's from the Leonard Curtis group, a business solutions group. So, I mean, arguably, the moment we say that, then we start to talk about insolvency practitioners, and in fact, there's a time where you need some business solutions and business structuring. And that's important to look at on a timely perspective from a compliance side for any business, and also because sometimes that restructuring piece helps to enable business survival, and business survival is going to be pretty key going forward. So we'll send out invites, and there'll be communications about this for the 25th of February. Be delighted if people are able to join for that, when we look forward to inviting Gary Kane, Rick Miller, and Donna Crompton from Leonard Curtis to present. If there are no other questions or topics to pick up on, then I think absolutely on time we could wind up proceedings. To thank everyone very, very much for attending, and mostly to our speakers as well. And we will look forward to seeing everybody at the next session on the 25th of February.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Nice to see
Thanks,
everybody.
Julian. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.